Yeah, absolutely. And looking at the material, the weakness here is that it frequently presents massive, highly contested geopolitical events as absolute facts rather than claims.
Right.
Like, it definitively states that a CIA base in Saudi Arabia was completely destroyed.
Which is a huge claim to just drop without context.
Exactly. And it claims 650 U.S. soldiers were killed, even though it actively acknowledges the U.S. only officially confirmed 6. Yeah, and it even asserts that World War III, with inevitable nuclear deployment, has already begun.
Right, so taking those massive claims at face value without scrutinizing the source motivations leaves the whole argument vulnerable to skepticism. It weakens the overall logical robustness.
I mean, if your audience is deeply familiar with geopolitics, the second you state an unverified state-sponsored casualty number as ground truth,
You lose them.
you completely lose them. They stop listening to your analysis and they start questioning your gullibility.
100%.
But I do want to push back on that just slightly, purely from a writer's perspective.
Okay, sure.
Because I can see why the author did this. When you're writing a broadcast script, you want to convey the sheer gravity of the conflict, you know?
Right.
Hitting the audience with a number like 650 casualties creates this immediate, gripping urgency. So if we tell the writer to back off those numbers, do we risk deflating the tension they're trying to build?
Well, not at all, if you handle it correctly. The suggestion here is to shift the framing from reporting absolute facts to analyzing the information war.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
So instead of taking state-sponsored casualty numbers or covert operational successes at face value, analyze why these specific claims are being broadcast by the involved actors.
Ah, what strategic purpose they serve.
Exactly. In modern warfare, the narrative surrounding a strike is often as strategically important as the kinetic strike itself. You actually build more tension by leaning into the discrepancy.
I like that. Let's workshop what that actually sounds like in the script. Right now, the text leans toward validating the Iranian claim of 650 deaths as a definitive hidden loss for a superpower. How does the writer pivot that section to focus on the information war?
Well, you guide the listener to analyze the distinct utility of these conflicting reports. The prober can ask, that makes sense, but could the evidence also support a different conclusion, like Z?
Right.
For instance, the script should explore how Iran benefits immensely on the domestic front from projecting massive U.S. losses.
Because it galvanizes their political base?
Exactly. It projects unyielding strength in the face of immense economic pressure, and it justifies their aggressive strategic posture to their own populace.
And on the flip side, looking at the U.S. strategy,
Yeah, the U.S. might strategically manage and meticulously verify casualty reporting to carefully control the escalation ladder. They want to avoid overwhelming domestic public pressure that would force them into a disproportionate ground war.
so instead of a sentence that says, despite U.S. claims of 6 dead, the reality is 650 soldiers were killed.
Right.
The writer could phrase it something like, Iran claims 650 casualties, while the U.S. acknowledges only 6. And that massive 644-body gap is exactly where the psychological war is being fought.
Oh, that's great. That completely reframes the discussion. It takes the listener behind the curtain of statecraft.
It makes the writer sound like an insider, not just a megaphone for state propaganda.
Exactly. And we can apply this exact same analytical lens to the claim about the CIA base being destroyed in Saudi Arabia.
Because right now the script treats this alleged strike as a definitive checkmate military action.
Like they just blew up a conventional military barracks and that's the end of the story.
Which we know isn't how intelligence outposts work. Absolute certainty is incredibly rare.
Right. So a concrete example here would be to suggest framing it around the realities of intelligence ambiguity, discussing how precision strikes are used as messaging tools rather than definitive military checkmates.
It's not necessarily about the building itself.
No, it's about demonstrating reach, demonstrating intelligence gathering capability. It's signaling intent to an adversary without triggering an all-out conventional war.
It's like slipping a threatening note under a door rather than knocking the door down entirely.
That is a perfect way to phrase it. Acknowledging that such facilities operate entirely in the shadows and their alleged destruction is a signal meant to deter future proxy funding massively bolsters the writer's credibility.
Yeah, it shows the audience that the writer actually understands how the shadow war operates.
Precisely.
And what about the apocalyptic language? The script highlights statements from European officials and a former NATO commander asserting that World War III has already begun.
Presented as a literal factual forecast, right?
Exactly.
This is another prime opportunity to contextualize the rhetoric. When high-level military figures warn of World War III, what is the strategic utility of that warning?
So are they trying to prepare domestic populations for prolonged economic hardship?
Or maybe pressure allied nations into rapidly increasing their defense spending. You dissect the rhetoric rather than just echoing the fatalism.
That makes total sense. Moving on to our next point, introducing multipolar geopolitical agency into deterministic predictions creates a much richer, more realistic forecast.
Yeah, and this is a key theme running through this material. The weakness here is that the narrative relies on highly fatalistic absolute scenarios.
It asserts that if the Iranian regime falls, the entire Islamic world will inevitably face total subjugation and enslavement.
Right, and it posits that a unified Mohammedan Accord is the absolute only logical counterweight to the Abraham Accords.
Which ignores the complex self-interested agency of other regional powers.
It really does. It flattens the extreme nuance of global diplomacy. It creates a narrative where nations are treated as passive dominoes rather than active players.
I think it's tempting for writers to use that domino theory framing because it's so easy for an audience to visualize, If X happens, Y is doomed.
Sure, it's dramatic. But for an audience that actually understands this region, it feels overly simplistic. Geopolitics doesn't work like a row of dominoes, where if one falls, the rest just politely tip over in sequence.
So how do we fix it?
The suggestion is to introduce counter-narratives and strategic alternatives. Acknowledge the pragmatic economic and historical realities that drive state actors.
Which allows the analysis to breathe.
Exactly. It accounts for the unpredictable nature of global politics. You don't lock the audience into a single, inescapable future, where the fall of one nation dictates the absolute ruin of dozens of others.
Let's get into the specifics of that. The script argues that without Iran acting as a bulwark, the broader Islamic world simply loses its defensive capability. How do we workshop that assertion to give those other nations agency?
Well, instead of asserting that the fall of Iran guarantees regional collapse, explore how power vacuums work. The prober can ask, building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of why?
Suggesting the listener explore how nations like Saudi Arabia might independently pivot?
Exactly. A concrete example would be to explore the secondary power structures that would immediately activate. Saudi Arabia, guided by aggressive initiatives like Vision 2030, might aggressively maneuver to secure its own sovereignty and regional hegemony if Iran's influence wanes.
Or Turkey. That's another massive player completely sidelined by this binary narrative.
100%.
The script could explore how Turkey, balancing its neo-Ottoman ambitions with its NATO membership, might project power southward to fill the void left by Tehran.
By introducing the self-interested, aggressive maneuverings of these secondary powers, the script moves away from a simplistic apocalyptic narrative. You give the script a much more sophisticated, multipolar geopolitical forecast.
Because state survival is the paramount driver of geopolitics.
Always. These actors aren't just waiting around to be conquered. They will forge new alliances and assert dominance. And that actually brings us right into the hypothetical Mohammedan Accord the writer proposes.
Yes, this was a really provocative section. The material asks, if the Abraham Accords can unite historical adversaries, why can't the Islamic world forge a similar unified pact against common external pressures?
But then the script suggests that minor theological differences are the primary barrier preventing this unity.
Specifically citing things like how to hold one's hands during prayer.
Which is a massive oversimplification. Attributing the lack of a unified geopolitical alliance solely to sectarian prayer practices is a major weakness.
It completely ignores the deeply entrenched structural and economic realities that govern state behavior.
Right. So the suggestion for improvement here is to address the pragmatic, realpolitik friction points that make such an alliance extraordinarily complex to execute. Make the analysis much more sophisticated.
Let's give the writer some concrete examples to include instead of just the theological differences.
Well, they need to analyze the intense economic competition between these nations. You have states fiercely competing for energy market dominance.
And for foreign direct investment and logistical superiority in global trade routes?
Don't forget the profound historical distrust regarding border security, water rights, and the funding of proxy militias.
Yeah, if the writer details these concrete systemic barriers, the analysis becomes exponentially more grounded.
It demonstrates an understanding that modern statecraft is driven by national interest and economic survival, not just shared religious identity. You transform a somewhat idealized, rhetorical question into a rigorous geopolitical case study.
Which leads us perfectly to our final major point. Threading disparate regional conflicts together with a clear thematic bridge prevents the broader analysis from feeling geographically fragmented.
And this script ambitiously covers an immense amount of ground, from the Mediterranean all the way to the Hindu Kush.
But the weakness is that it rapid fires through wildly different conflict zones and topics without seamless transitions.
It really causes cognitive whiplash for the listener.
Moving abruptly from the intricacies of Iranian missile depletion strategies and Mojtaba Khamenei's potential succession directly into the granular casualty statistics of the Pakistan-Taliban border clashes feels jarring.
Highly disjointed. When you jump from a high-level leadership succession crisis in Tehran to localized border skirmishes in Balochistan without a clear connector, the audience easily loses the thread of your overarching argument.
I completely agree. But I also want to acknowledge that the sheer volume of tactical data the author has gathered is fantastic.
Oh, the research is excellent.
The section discussing the depletion of U.S. Patriot missile interceptors is incredibly well researched. The script details how older, cheaper generation missiles are being used to drain the expensive interceptor stockpiles of Gulf nations and the U.S.
And how the defense of Ukraine has already strained these resources.
Exactly. The data is great. The problem is what comes next. Almost immediately, the script pivots to the Taliban attacking Pakistani border posts. So how does the writer fix that structural disjointedness without losing the great data?
The suggestion is to establish a core unifying thesis to anchor these rapid geographic shifts. Create a thematic bridge that explicitly shows the listener how a shift in one theater of war directly triggers actions in another.
It's about demonstrating cause and effect on a macro scale.
Right.
So what is the bridge between a Patriot missile in the Red Sea and a Taliban militant in Pakistan? Let's brainstorm a concrete example for the writer.
I'd suggest using the concept of global resource diversion, or proxy opportunism, to connect the dots. The presenter might note, let's look closely at the section discussing X. You provide the specific example of linking the depletion of U.S. Patriot missile interceptors directly to the Taliban's border strikes. Suggest that the listener explicitly write a transition showing how opportunistic actors like the Taliban test borders exactly because superpower resources and global attention are tied up in the Middle East.
Let's actually draft what that transition might sound like for the ear.
Go for it.
The writer could say something like, while American interceptors drained the Gulf's defense budget.
And global intelligence is laser-focused on the Mediterranean.
Exactly.
Insurgent groups recognize a rare window of impunity.
That's perfect. A diverted superpower means unguarded borders in South Asia. This is exactly why we are seeing the Taliban escalate strikes against Pakistani border posts, opportunism created by distraction.
By explicitly linking the logistical strain of the U.S. military regarding interceptor missiles to the tactical aggression of the Taliban, the script suddenly feels incredibly cohesive.
It's no longer a list of random regional conflicts.
No, it becomes a unified theory of a cascading global security crisis. You show the listener that military logistics in one hemisphere have a direct, measurable impact on the security posture of another.
Does the succession of Mojtaba Khamenei fit into this thematic bridge as well? The script drops that in right between the missile data and the Taliban attacks.
Absolutely, but only if the writer frames it correctly. The succession of the supreme leader isn't just an isolated domestic political issue for Iran.
Right, it's a massive variable that dictates how proxy forces will behave across all these theaters.
So if the author frames the succession discussion through the exact same lens of global resource diversion, it works perfectly.
Meaning the writer could explore whether a new, potentially younger leader will escalate proxy conflicts to consolidate power, or seek diplomatic off-ramps to relieve economic pressure.
Exactly. That naturally tethers the internal politics of Iran back to the broader thesis of global instability.
It's all about maintaining that central spine of the narrative.
Every tactical detail, whether it's the cost of a drone versus a Patriot missile, the number of border checkpoints destroyed, or a change in political leadership, must feed back into the core thesis.
That way, the audience never feels lost, no matter how many international borders the analysis crosses. You are guiding them on a very deliberate, logical journey.
It makes the analysis undeniable.
Briefly summarizing our analysis today, we've identified 3 main takeaways to elevate this highly engaging material. First, contextualizing extraordinary claims within the broader scope of information warfare, rather than taking them as absolute facts, will deeply enhance the script's journalistic authority.
Second, enriching deterministic predictions with geopolitical nuance and state agency will create a much more realistic multipolar forecast.
And finally, utilizing thematic bridges, like the concept of global resource diversion, will seamlessly connect disparate regional conflicts and maintain a cohesive narrative flow.
To put all of this into action, analyze the motivations behind those massive casualty claims and the ambiguity of intelligence operations. Explore the secondary power vacuums that would emerge if major players collapsed, moving away from those fatalistic domino theories.
And crucially, build explicit, logical bridges between geographic locations to clearly show your audience how a military distraction in one theater emboldens actors in another.
A fantastic piece of work to review.
We want to sincerely thank you for submitting this deeply complex and meticulously researched material. It is no small feat to tackle these global intricacies with such detail. We warmly invite you to submit your revised work or any future materials back in for another critique. Until then, keep refining, keep analyzing, and keep writing.